Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for joining me again today. If you love incredible stories from history, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into one of the most famous and heartbreaking events of all time, the tragic sinking of the Titanic. So sit back, get comfortable, and let's step aboard the ship that was once called Unsinkable. On the morning of April 10th, 1912, the docks of Southampton buzzed with energy. Thousands gathered to see the largest, most luxurious ship the world had ever known. The RMS Titanic, a floating palace of steel and opulence, stretched nearly 900 feet long. Her four towering funnels dominated the skyline, casting long shadows across the crowded harbour. She was the pride of the White Star Line, and in the eyes of many, she was unsinkable. Dock workers wiped the grime from their hands to stare at her gleaming white superstructure. Mothers held children aloft to glimpse the marvel. Vendors sold papers and shouted headlines about the ship's grandeur. For the wealthy, this was the voyage of dreams. For the poor, it was a chance at a new life in America. All eyes were on her, and all hearts were full of expectation. Among the passengers was Isidor Strauss, co-owner of Mercy's department store, boarding with his wife, Ida. Their fur-lined coats and elegant hats drew attention as they stepped into the first-class entrance. They had wealth, reputation, and everything money could buy, except, as fate would prove, immunity from tragedy. Elsewhere on the same pier, Jack Dawson-like figures in steerage, poor immigrants from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Italy, clutched bundles of belongings. They had sold nearly everything they owned for a ticket. Their dreams weren't of champagne dinners or velvet suites, but of factory jobs in New York, of a chance to feed their children, of hope beyond the grey skies of Europe. The Titanic offered both classes a passage, but not the same journey. The ship itself seemed like two worlds joined together, a grand hotel afloat above deck and a crowded boarding house below. As she prepared to depart, an air of festivity filled the docks. The band on board tuned their instruments. The ship's whistles roared, echoing across Southampton water. A cheer went up from the thousands watching. Slowly, gracefully, the Titanic began to move, pulled from the pier by tugboats. Women waved handkerchiefs, children shouted farewells, and families cried out to loved ones they would never see again. Not everyone felt joy. A stoker, blackened with coal dust, wiped his brow and muttered that no ship was ever too big to sink. A young stewardess whispered a prayer, uneasy with the Titanic's size and the weight of responsibility it carried, but their doubts were drowned by the excitement of departure. On board, the passengers marvelled at the ship's splendour. The first-class grand staircase glittered with chandeliers. The dining saloons stretched the length of a city block. Turkish baths, squash courts, and a heated swimming pool awaited the wealthy. It was a floating city with elegance beyond imagination. Meanwhile, deep below deck, steerage passengers found narrow bunks crammed in small cabins. Still, compared to what many had endured on older ships, Titanic's steerage was comfortable. They too felt awe as they stepped onto her steel floors, realising they were part of something historic. As the Titanic sailed out of Southampton and into the English Channel, her passengers gazed back at the fading shore. Some waved until land was gone, others held hands in silence, thinking only of what lay ahead. Few could imagine that this was the last solid ground many of them would ever see. The Titanic pressed onward, towards Cherbourg, then Queenstown, before setting course across the vast Atlantic. She carried 2,240 souls, each with a story, each with a dream, and though the sea stretched calm and endless, destiny already waited in the icy waters ahead. The dream ship had begun her only voyage. For the first few days at sea, life on the Titanic felt like a dream. The weather was calm, the Atlantic unusually still, as if the ocean itself wants to cradle this great ship. In first class, the days were filled with leisure. Gentlemen in fine suits strolled the promenade deck, puffing cigars as the sea breeze carried their conversations. Ladies, wrapped in silks and furs, showed off their newest Paris fashions, their jewels glittering in the sunlight. Inside the grand dining saloon, meals were feasts that stretched for hours. Dishes like oysters, filet mignon, lamb with mint sauce, and peaches in chartreuse jelly were served on fine china. Each course was accompanied by the finest wines, and the hum of violins from the ship's band floated through the air. Passengers, like John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in America, and his young bride, Madeline, walked the decks as if aboard a floating palace. To them, Titanic was not just a ship. It was a stage where wealth and power could shine, but only a few decks below. Life told a different story. In steerage, the narrow cabins were crowded, 4 to 6 bunks to a room. The air was thick with the smell of damp clothes and the sound of babies crying. Yet, despite the hardships, the atmosphere was filled with hope. Families from Ireland, Sweden, and Italy gathered in common rooms, singing folk songs, clapping hands, and dancing to fiddles late into the night. For them, Titanic was not about luxury, it was about opportunity, the first step toward a new beginning in America. Children played games in the corridors, their laughter echoing through steel walls. Mothers comforted them with stories of the new land, while fathers spoke in hushed tones about the jobs they hoped to find. Their dreams, though humble, carried as much weight as the jewels above deck. In the heart of the ship, the engine room roared with the pounding rhythm of 29 coal-fired boilers. The stokers, men covered in sweat and soot, worked in hellish heat, shoveling coal day and night to feed the engines that pushed Titanic through the Atlantic at over 20 knots. To them, this ship was no dream. It was labour, endless and brutal. Above, the crew and officers moved with discipline and pride. The Titanic's captain, Edward J. Smith, stood firm on the bridge, his white beard catching the wind. Known as the millionaire's captain, he had commanded the grandest ships of his time, and many passengers felt safer simply because of his presence. Yet even he could not know what awaited his vessel. The contrast between these worlds was striking. First-class passengers reclined on deck chairs beneath warm blankets, sipping tea and reading novels. Below them, steerage passengers shared loaves of bread, passing cups of broth, and telling stories of survival from their homelands. Both groups travelled aboard the same ship, but their experiences could not have been further apart. And yet, in small moments, their lives intertwined. A young immigrant boy leaned over the rail to watch the wealthy promenading, wide-eyed at the sight of dresses worth more than his family's life savings. Meanwhile, a curious first-class girl peeked down a stairwell, listening to the joyous music rising from steerage. For a moment, the lines between classes blurred, and humanity felt whole. The Titanic herself was alive with energy. Her decks buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages. Her dining rooms echoed with laughter. Her smoking lounges with debate. Her cabins with dreams whispered in the dark. But beneath the laughter, the dancing, and the polished silverware, an unease stirred. Reports of icebergs drifting south had begun to reach the captain. The North Atlantic, though calm, was still the ice field of April. Warnings were noted, but the Titanic pressed on at near full speed. For now, the passengers remained blissfully unaware, living their separate lives aboard the greatest ship ever built, united by a destiny that would soon bind them all together. It was the night of April 14th, 1912. The Titanic sailed smoothly across the North Atlantic, her decks quiet, her passengers asleep or enjoying the last hours of leisure. The sea was eerily calm, so calm that sailors later described it as like glass. No waves broke against the hull, no foam reflected the starlight. The stillness made spotting danger nearly impossible. On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch scanned the horizon. The air was biting cold, the temperature near freezing. The ship ploughed ahead at nearly 22 knots, her engines relentless. Captain Edward Smith had retired for the night, trusting his crew. High above, in the crow's nest, 2 lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, kept their eyes fixed on the dark horizon. They had no binoculars. Those had been left behind in Southampton. Their only tools were their eyes and the stars. The clock ticked toward 11:40 p.m. Suddenly, Fleet spotted a dark shadow looming directly ahead. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, just a blur against the star-filled sky. But then it grew sharper, taller, and terrifyingly close. His heart raced. He rang the bell 3 times, the signal for danger, then grabbed the phone to the bridge. "Iceberg, right ahead." On the bridge, Murdoch reacted instantly. "Hard starboard!" he shouted. The quartermaster spun the wheel, while Murdoch ordered, "Full astern!" The giant ship began to turn, but she was too close, too fast, too heavy. The passengers felt only a faint vibration as the iceberg scraped along the starboard side. It wasn't the violent crash one might imagine. Instead, it was a long, low groan of steel tearing open. Beneath the surface, the ice ripped a series of gashes, opening 6 watertight compartments to the sea. Up on deck, only a handful noticed. Some passengers felt a slight shudder like a train stopping. A few were curious enough to step outside. On the lower decks, immigrants heard the sound of rushing water. In the boiler rooms, stokers shouted as seawater poured in, flooding everything in its path. Within minutes, Captain Smith was summoned to the bridge. He listened grimly as Titanic's designer Thomas Andrews inspected the damage. Andrews knew ships better than anyone alive. His face grew pale as he whispered the words no one wanted to hear. "She's going down. It's a mathematical certainty." The Titanic, the unsinkable ship, had less than 3 hours to live. At first, there was no panic. The Titanic was still afloat, her lights glowing warmly against the cold night. Passengers barely noticed the slight tilt of the deck. Some even joked about the unsinkable ship giving them a thrill. But down below, the truth was grim. Seawater surged through the lower compartments, swallowing entire rooms within minutes. Firemen and stokers worked desperately to keep the boilers alive, shoveling coal into furnaces even as icy water crept up around their boots. Their orders were clear: keep the lights burning, keep the power flowing, no matter the cost. On the upper decks, stewards moved quietly through the halls, knocking on cabin doors. "Just a precaution," they said. "Please, put on your life belts and come up to the boat deck." Many passengers, half asleep, laughed off the warnings. After all, Titanic was unsinkable. But then came the order to uncover the lifeboats. The air grew colder with every minute. Stars sparkled overhead, but the sea remained black and endless. Passengers gathered on deck, bundled in overcoats and blankets. Mothers clutched children. Men smoked nervously, trying to hide their fear. The band, led by Wallace Hartley, began to play soft music to calm the crowd. Captain Smith, his face ashen, gave the unthinkable order: "Women and children first." The first lifeboats were lowered half empty. Many refused to board, certain it was safer to stay on the great ship than to climb into a tiny wooden boat dangling above the dark ocean. Lifeboat number 7, built to hold 65, left with only 28 souls aboard. Below deck, however, panic had begun. Immigrant families in third class struggled to find their way up through locked gates and confusing passageways. Fathers begged crewmen to let them pass. Mothers wept, clutching babies in their arms. For many, the way forward was barred by language, by class, or by cold indifference. As the minutes ticked by, the Titanic's bow dipped lower into the sea. The deck angle grew steeper. Fear spread like wildfire. Some men tried to disguise themselves as women to slip into the lifeboats. Others stood back with grim resignation, knowing their chances were gone. Husbands kissed wives goodbye. Lovers promised to meet again, though they knew they never would. Still, the band played. Hymns drifted into the icy night air. Music for courage, music for farewell. In the lifeboats, those who had left the ship watched in silence as the Titanic's stern rose higher and higher. The lights flickered, then went black. Out of the darkness came the sound of thousands of voices, shouts, prayers, screams. Then, one by one, the voices began to fade into the cold Atlantic. At 2:20 a.m., April 15th, 1912, the Titanic slipped beneath the waves. More than 1,500 souls were lost. Only the lifeboats remained, scattered across a silent sea of ice. The Titanic was gone. Where moments before had stood the largest, most luxurious ship in the world, now there was only an empty star-strewn sky and a black, icy sea. All around, lifeboats floated silently. Men, women, and children huddled together, their breath visible in the frigid air. Some clutched at loved ones, others sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Then came the sound, a terrible chorus of cries from the water. Hundreds of voices, desperate, pleading, calling for help. Mothers screamed for children. Men shouted for boats to return, but the lifeboats stayed back. Few dared to row into the chaos, fearing they'd be swamped. Slowly, one by one, the voices began to fall silent, swallowed by the cold. In the lifeboats, survivors sat in horror. Every minute felt like an eternity. The temperature was below freezing. Clothes were soaked, hands numb, lips blue. Some died quietly in the boats, unable to endure the cold. Others clung fiercely to life, staring into the endless night. Then at last, a light appeared on the horizon, the RMS Carpathia. For the survivors, that distant glow was like a miracle. The Carpathia's captain, Arthur Rostron, had raced through the night at full speed, dodging icebergs to reach them. As dawn broke, the survivors finally saw the scale of the tragedy. The sea was littered with wreckage, drifting bodies, and scattered belongings. One by one, the lifeboats were pulled alongside the Carpathia. Frozen, shivering survivors were lifted aboard. Mothers wept with relief, clutching their children. Widows wept with grief, staring at the empty sea. Out of 2,200 passengers and crew, just over 700 survived. When the Carpathia reached New York, the world learned of the disaster. Crowds gathered at the docks, desperate for news of loved ones. The Titanic, the ship once hailed as a triumph of modern engineering, had become a symbol of human fragility and hubris. And for the survivors, the sinking was not just history, it was a wound they carried for the rest of their lives. The Titanic's sinking was more than a maritime tragedy. It was a turning point in history. In the days after the disaster, shock spread across the world. Newspapers filled with grief-stricken headlines. Families mourned lost fathers, mothers, children, and friends. People demanded answers. How could the unsinkable Titanic sink? Why were there not enough lifeboats? Why had so many lives been lost needlessly? The tragedy sparked immediate change. Governments and shipping companies could no longer ignore safety. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, was established, mandating lifeboats for all aboard, lifeboat drills, and 24-hour radio watch on ships. The women and children first rule became forever linked with Titanic, a symbol of both sacrifice and failure. But beyond rules and regulations, the Titanic left a deeper mark on human memory. It became a story of hubris, the belief that human progress and technology could conquer nature. The ship was the largest, most luxurious creation of its time, yet one iceberg reminded the world that nature still holds the final power. For survivors, the legacy was personal. Some never spoke of that night again. Others spent their lives sharing their stories, hoping the world would never forget. The memory of the band playing Nearer, My God to Thee as the ship went down became a symbol of courage in the face of doom. Today, more than a century later, the Titanic still fascinates us. Its wreck lies 2 miles beneath the Atlantic, a rusting tomb slowly being reclaimed by the sea, yet it lives on in films, books, songs and memorials across the world. The Titanic was meant to be a triumph of human achievement. Instead, it became a reminder of our limits. Its legacy is a blend of grief, caution and timeless fascination, a story that ensures those who lived and those who died will never be forgotten. Thank you so much for watching this story of the Titanic. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with friends who also love history, and be sure to check out the channel because I'll be adding more fascinating stories every week. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay curious and I'll see you in the next story.